Superman 1 and 2 were almost radically different movies, campier in tone and more in line with Adam West's Batman. Lois and Clark would have gotten married, Superman would have given up his powers in the first film, not the second, Clark would have been a newscaster, and Superman and Lex Luthor would be forced to team up in the second film to stop Zod and the Kryptonians after they were released from the Phantom Zone. Not only that, but a revolving door of A-list stars like Clint Eastwood nearly wore the cape. So how did we go from that to one of the most beloved superhero films ever made? To find out, let's go behind the scenes of the film's chaotic production while we take a look at what could have been Superman the movie. After finishing The Three Musketeers and The Four Musketeers, which were shot back-to-back, Elias Salkind, the son and the father-son producing duo known as the Salkinds, proposed making Superman as their next big project, along with their producing partner, Pierre Spengler. After securing the rights from DC with the stipulation that the film respect the character's integrity and that DC retain approval over major creative decisions, the Salkinds began searching for a distributor. They'd eventually strike a deal with Warner Brothers and negotiate what's called a negative pickup deal, where the Salkinds were responsible for financing and producing the movie themselves for an agreed upon cost that Warner Brothers would eventually purchase the finished movie for. But if the film went over budget, it would be up to the Salkinds to cover the difference. With the plethora of superhero films today, it's easy to forget that at the time there had never been a big screen superhero film, and adapting Superman, which was largely seen as being for kids, was an enormous gamble. To win confidence with investors and help them raise money, the Salkinds chose to focus on hiring well-known names behind the camera and in front of it. To write the script, they hired Mario Puzo, fresh off The Godfather, the highest grossing film of all time up to that point. After spending some time with the writers at DC, Puzo sat down to write a sprawling 200-page script. After reading it and realizing it was too long to fit into one film, the Salkinds would encourage Puzo to write more and turn it into two movies, which they would shoot back to back, like what they did on the Musketeer films. The result would be a 300-plus page script, and while Puzo was responsible for the backbone of the finished films, there are several notable differences in his early drafts. The most glaring is its tone, with Puzo's draft feeling more at home with Superman the Animated Series versus the more grounded, adult-oriented film Richard Donner ultimately delivered. Puzo's version also opens on Krypton, which he describes as being a city made of glass, and in this version there are 4 Kryptonians sentenced to the Phantom Zone, not 3, although very little time is spent on them. Additionally, Jor-El's plan involves sending Krypton's best and brightest to Earth to save the Kryptonian race, and also act as leaders to those on Earth, since Kryptonians will have superhuman abilities from Earth's yellow sun. Obviously, this plan is rejected, and Jor-El instead sends his only son, Kal-El. After arriving on Earth, the Smallville section of the film is considerably brief, and not the sweeping, somber epic of the final film, with Clark feeling like an outcast and lamenting not being able to use his powers. In Puzo's version, we see a quick montage of his childhood, during which he often receives guidance from the onboard computer in his spacecraft, urging him to keep his powers a secret. After Pa Kent dies in the hospital of an incurable illness, and Clark mourns his inability to save him, Clark leaves home on the computer's advice, traveling to the Arctic to construct the Fortress of Solitude himself using his powers. Once in Metropolis, Superman isn't introduced in the thrilling helicopter rescue of Lois Lane, but rather his first appearance is stopping Luthor and his henchmen from robbing a bank, which Luthor narrowly escapes. It's incredibly underwhelming by comparison, and Clark isn't just a reporter, he's an on-camera newscaster, while Perry demoted Lois to a weather girl because she looks good on television. However, after saving Lois a few times from crime, Superman grants her an exclusive interview, which forces Perry to promote her back to reporter. There's also more of a focus on the news team, featuring Clark, Lois, Jimmy, and a character from the comics named Lombard, who's a former star quarterback turned sportscaster. And while it's nice to see a greater focus on the Daily Planet, here renamed Galaxy Communications, the script includes an annoying amount of football jokes and references courtesy of Lombard. While investigating a supposed terrorist plot to blow up an oil refinery in Iran, Lois and Clark stumble upon Luthor and his goons stealing a priceless antiquity. Clark changes into Superman, only to be captured, along with Lois, when it's revealed the entire crisis was an elaborate trap set up by Luthor to neutralize Superman with kryptonite. Lois eventually helps him escape, and the two quickly fall in love, as Lois determines that Superman and Clark are the same person. Their relationship, though rushed, leads Superman to take her to the Fortress of Solitude, where he gives up his powers. A moment that happens in the first film here rather than the second. Before stepping into the chamber, Jor-El warns him that he'll have 10 days to reverse the procedure. Afterwards, Clark and Lois get married, and he opens up about why he's giving up his powers. Not just for love, but because he longs to feel human. He resents feeling superior, having never experienced a headache, a hangover, or even being drunk. He admits he wants to fit in, play sports, and live without the burden of godlike strength. Most of all, he questions whether he's truly ever been brave, or if his courage was just a byproduct of invincibility. On their way back to Metropolis, they stop at a roadside diner, similar to the scene in Superman 2, where a man rudely takes Clark's seat. When Clark stands up for himself, the situation escalates, and he gets badly beaten, even though here he takes on 3 men instead of 1. Back at the Daily Planet, Clark is assigned to cover the development of America's new H-bomb at a testing site. While he's there, Luthor and his goons break into the facility and steal radioactive material. Clark attempts to intervene, but is exposed to severe radiation and rushed to the hospital. Realizing the only way to save him is to restore his powers, Lois, Jimmy, and Lombard break Clark out of the hospital and fly him to the North Pole. After crash landing near the Fortress of Solitude, they help him reach the power chamber, where he regains his abilities. To celebrate getting his powers back, Superman serves them champagne that erases their collective memories, since they now know his secret identity. The film climaxes with Luthor threatening to detonate a nuclear bomb in Metropolis unless he's paid $100 million. Superman returns just in time, flying the nuke into space where it detonates safely, only to crack open the Phantom Zone and release the 4 Kryptonian villains, setting the stage for a sequel as the film ends on a foreboding note. At the start of the second film, Luthor is in hiding, evading a nationwide manhunt. Meanwhile, Superman stops a terrorist attack at the Vatican, part of a larger distraction that allows Luthor to hijack a nuclear submarine, intending to sell it to the Soviet Union. Though Superman intercepts him, Lex is granted amnesty for his crimes in exchange for not detonating the sub's arsenal with everyone on board. Concerned that he's advancing at the Daily Planet not on merit, but because as Superman he's always first on the scene, Clark resigns, feeling it's neither fair nor honest. The 4 Kryptonians eventually arrive on Earth and destroy Australia before descending on Metropolis. In the battle that follows, Superman is badly injured, but receives help from Luthor, who sees the Kryptonians as rivals. Offering to work together, Luthor lures the villains to the Fortress of Solitude, where Superman uses the molecule chamber to strip them of their powers. He then serves them memory-erasing drinks. The film ends with Clark returning to the Daily Planet, while Luthor begins planning his next scheme with the now powerless Kryptonians as his new henchmen. With the script for 2 films finished, the hunt began for director. As Steven Spielberg was filming Jaws, his agent repeatedly called the Salkinds to express his interest in directing Superman, as the young director was an enormous fan. However, producer Alexander Salkind hesitated as he heard that Jaws was going over budget, famously saying, "Let's wait until his big fish opens." When Jaws did open and proved to be a massive hit, the Salkinds tried to hire Spielberg, but by then he was committed to Close Encounters and reportedly held a grudge for initially being passed over. The Salkinds then hired Goldfinger director Guy Hamilton, who along with the Salkinds wanted a more campy, tongue-in-cheek take on Superman, similar in tone to the Adam West Batman series, and so brought in new writers to bring that vision to life. Hamilton had a flair for cheeky humor, famously approving a side whistle sound effect to one of Bond's most iconic stunts in The Man with the Golden Gun, a choice often criticized for undercutting the moment. As the Salkinds began to round out their cast with well-known names, they hired another Godfather alum, Marlon Brando, to play Jor-El, offering him an enormous sum of money at the time plus back-end participation, which would eventually come to $19 million. Production was initially set to shoot in Italy, but had to be relocated to England due to an obscenity lawsuit Brando faced over the last Tango in Paris's infamous butter scene. However, it soon emerged that Hamilton, as a tax exile, couldn't work in the UK for extended periods, forcing the Salkinds to replace him. After seeing The Omen, they hired Richard Donner, offering him $1 million to direct. However, after reading the newly rewritten script, Donner was appalled, feeling the script treated the source material with disrespect. For example, there's a scene where Superman's looking for Lex Luthor in Metropolis, and he's looking for every bald head in the city. When he flies down and taps a guy on the shoulder, it's Telly Savalas, in character is Kojak, who hands him a lollipop and says, "Who loves ya, baby?" Donner would agree to direct, later saying the script treated Superman with such disrespect that he felt compelled to take the job simply to defend the character. To do so, Donner brought in friend Tom Mankiewicz, nephew of Herman Mankiewicz, aka Mank, famous for writing Citizen Kane, to overhaul the script. However, he first had to convince the Salkinds, who believed the existing version was perfect. After Donner threatened to quit, the Salkinds relented and allowed him and Mankiewicz to rewrite it. Notably, Donner wasn't involved in Superman 3, and that film's goofier, more slapstick tone offers a glimpse of what the first film would have looked like had Donner never been hired. In line with their strategy of casting top-tier talent, the Salkinds initially offered the role of Lex Luthor to Dustin Hoffman, who declined. The part ultimately went to recent Oscar winner Gene Hackman. However, Hackman refused to shave his head or mustache. As a workaround, Donner had him appear with various hairstyles throughout the film, styled to look like wigs, and convinced him to wear a bald cap, only for the reveal at the end of the film. When it came to the mustache, Donner made a deal over the phone. If Hackman shaved his, Donner would shave his too. On set and now mustacheless, Hackman pointed out that Donner still had his, until Donner peeled it off, revealing it was a fake all along, courtesy of the makeup department, much to Hackman's amusement. Donner's steady hand proved essential when managing A-list talent and big personalities. When Brando floated bizarre ideas like portraying Jor-El as a talking suitcase or a green bagel since he was an alien, panic began to set in for producer Ilya Salkind, but Donner remained calm and firmly told Brando, "Marlon, I think that people want to see Marlon Brando playing Jor-El. They don't want to see a green bagel." That one line diffused the situation completely, and from that point on, Brando was fully cooperative. To play Miss Teschmacher, Donner and Mankiewicz wanted Goldie Hawn, but she wanted the same salary as Hackman, which the Salkinds balked at. Instead, they offered the part to Anne Margaret, who accepted. However, after they learned they could get Valerie Perrine for even less money, they quickly signed her instead, despite already having an agreement with Margaret. When Mankiewicz reminded them that they already cast the part, Alexander Salkind reportedly dismissed it, saying, "Let her sue." Casting Superman proved to be the biggest hurdle. Before Donner came aboard, the Salkinds wanted to hire an A-list star. They would turn yet again to another Godfather actor, James Caan, but he turned it down, as he didn't want to wear the suit. Clint Eastwood was also offered the part, but he ultimately turned it down too. Worried about being typecast and feeling the character didn't align with his preference for playing more grounded, yet flawed human characters like in his westerns or Dirty Harry films. In fact, almost every major actor at the time was offered the part and turned it down. Robert Redford worried audiences wouldn't be able to separate him from the character, feeling he was too famous, while Steve McQueen and Paul Newman both felt they were too old. Burt Reynolds preferred roles that matched his established cocky screen persona, and Nick Nolte would only do it if he could play him as a schizophrenic. None of this ultimately mattered once Donner joined the project, as he believed it was essential to cast an unknown, someone audiences wouldn't associate with any previous roles, allowing them to fully believe in him as Superman. Early on, he and Ilya Salkind met with Christopher Reeve, but felt he was too young and skinny, so moved on, auditioning several hundred actors. Sylvester Stallone lobbied hard for the role hot off of Rocky, but Brando, who had casting approval, allegedly vetoed him, although Donner would later say Stallone wasn't right for the part. Even Olympian Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner, auditioned for the role, with his audition allegedly being described as terrible. Things got so desperate that they even auditioned Salkind's wife's dentist, who bore a physical resemblance to the Man of Steel, but ultimately couldn't act. Eventually, John Wayne's son, Patrick, was cast as Superman, but had to drop out once he learned his father had cancer. While going through the headshots of actors, Salkind stumbled on Reeve and convinced Donner to at least bring him in for a screen test. 10 minutes after the test, Donner called Salkind up and said, "We got our Superman." Immediately, they paired Reeve up with the bodybuilder David Prowse, who played Darth Vader, to bulk up his physique. While he was bulking up though, they realized they could still shoot the scene where Clark gets his powers back from Jor-El, since Reeve would be wearing a jacket and you wouldn't be able to see his physique. While shooting the scene, Reeve pretended to convulse to simulate the enormous amount of energy flowing back into his body, leading Brando to smirk at the actor trying to contain his laughter. Reeve would then tell Brando that, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I sure am trying, and I'd appreciate it if we could work together on this." Reeve's issues with Brando didn't end there. Brando refused to memorize his lines, often reading off of cue cards, leading Reeve to call him a sellout on Letterman after the movie wrapped. Casting Lois Lane also proved to be a major challenge, with over 100 actresses auditioning before the final decision came down to Margot Kidder and Stockard Channing, who would go on to play Rizzo in Grease. Kidder ultimately landed the role, but her dynamic with Reeve on set was tense. While Reeve approached the film with intense discipline and seriousness, Kidder had a looser, more improvisational style and often joked around. The clashing methods led to frequent arguments, with Reeve frustrated by her spontaneity and Kidder irritated by what she saw as his controlling tendencies. Some Some on set felt that Reeve, a newcomer suddenly thrust into global fame, began to let the role go to his head. Jack O'Halloran, who played Non, later claimed that Reeve started believing his own press and wasn't the nicest of people until he got hurt. Kidder also called him an a-hole. Reeve, for his part, would say that he wasn't there to win a popularity contest or have fun. He was there to put something on screen that's going to entertain people later. Plus, he felt enormous pressure being the temporary custodian of a part that is an essential piece of American mythology. Both Superman 1 and 2 were shot concurrently to save money, but before Donner ever came aboard, the Salkinds had spent a ton of money. For example, they spent $2 million on flying tests and had to pay off original director Guy Hamilton. Scenes that required multiple days to shoot, like the Kryptonians attacking the White House, were unrealistically allotted just half a day for Donner to film, which he balked at. When he was accused by the Salkinds of being slow and indecisive, sending the production over schedule and budget, Donner complained that he never even saw the budget, nor was he even allowed to see it. As production costs spiraled out of control, the Salkinds ran out of money and held the film negative hostage, refusing to release it until Warner Brothers agreed to purchase additional international distribution rights. Warner, confident the film would be a hit, gladly agreed, knowing it would increase their ownership stake, although by this point they also regretted not just producing it themselves. The Salkinds, however, were furious, as the deal significantly diluted both their own share and that of their investors, putting them more at odds with Donner. Meanwhile, Richard Lester, who had previously sued the Salkinds for unpaid earnings for directing the 3 and 4 Musketeers and won a hollow judgment against a bankrupt offshore company, was brought in to help mediate the increasingly toxic relationship between Donner and the Salkinds, who had stopped speaking altogether, but it was clear he was being kept in the wings as a backup plan. Known for shooting quickly, Lester became the Salkinds' ace in the hole, especially since they owed him money over the Musketeer films. Lester would actually be responsible for suggesting they stop shooting scenes for the second film and focus solely on the first film, and take the second film's original ending, which saw Superman reverse time to stop the release of the Kryptonians from the Phantom Zone, and make that the ending of Superman 1, so that he reverses time to save Lois's life instead. Originally, the first film ended on a cliffhanger, as the first of the 2 nuclear rockets that Superman flew into outer space explodes and frees the 3 Phantom Zone villains. As a result of this, the second film had to be rewritten to include the Paris bomb sequence, which would be used to free the Kryptonians instead. The Writers Guild of America refused to give Tom Mankiewicz official screenwriting credit for his extensive rewrites on the film, so Donner gave him a creative consultant credit instead. However, the placement of that credit, appearing before the official writing credits, angered the WGA, which considered it a violation of their rules. The guild later sued, and the controversy led to a new regulation prohibiting such placements in the future, which is now known as the Tom Mankiewicz rule. Jerry Goldsmith, who had previously scored Donner's The Omen, was originally slated to compose the music for the film. However, due to scheduling conflicts, Goldsmith had to bow out, and John Williams was brought in to replace him. While Goldsmith would later go on to score Supergirl, offering a glimpse of what his take on Superman might have sounded like, it's hard to imagine anything rivaling what Williams ultimately delivered. His iconic soaring theme became instantly synonymous with the character and remains one of the most recognizable film scores in cinematic history. After filming for the first film wrapped, Donner told the press that he'll finish up part 2 but under his conditions. Then he called the Salkinds a-holes. After reading this, the Salkinds decided not to bring Donner back for the sequel and replaced him with Lester. This decision to replace Donner sparked major backlash among the cast and crew. Mankiewicz declined to return, Hackman refused to participate further, forcing the use of a body double and voice impersonator, and editor Stuart Baird also walked away. Even composer John Williams declined to score the sequel. Brando's already filmed scenes were also cut from the sequel, with Jor-El replaced by Superman's mother to avoid paying Brando additional back-end royalties. Mankiewicz later criticized the decision, arguing that Jor-El's arc, sacrificing himself to restore his son's powers, was a powerful and complete father-son story, both thematically and artistically. Additionally, Richard Lester brought back David and Leslie Newman, the writers responsible for the campier draft that followed Puzo's, to help rework the sequel. Lester reshot large portions of the film and added new scenes, resulting in a final product that felt like a Frankenstein's monster of conflicting visions, blending Donner's sincerity with Lester's broader, more comedic tone. Decades later, in response to fan demand, Donner was finally able to release his own cut of Superman 2, offering a glimpse of the more serious, emotionally grounded sequel he originally intended. In the end, Richard Donner saved Superman. He brought sincerity, heart, and a sense of weight to the project. skillfully managing the material and the larger-than-life personalities in front of the camera. However, the spine of the story and several key sequences still originated in Mario Puzo's original script. Although had that version been filmed as written, Superman might have ended up as a campy relic of the 70s, but Donner elevated it into something timeless. The only thing he couldn't rescue was his working relationship with the Salkinds, and ultimately, that was the cost of his vision.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.